Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Climate Commission's student-led discussion with the further education sector. I'm Fiona Goodwin from the EAUC. We will ask you to keep muted whilst we just go through the questions and answers, and then we will open it up for further debate. So please just unmute yourself to ask a question or raise your hand or use the chat function. We are recording this session and it will be publicly available on our website afterwards. I will now hand you over to our chair of this meeting, Ian Munro.
Lovely, thanks Fiona, and a very, very warm welcome to you all, and thanks so much for joining us today. I'm conscious, it's that time of year where I think everybody's ready for a break, and a well-deserved one, and equally I'm sure the number of Zoom calls you have a week means that it's quite a challenge. So thanks so much for joining us on what is a really important topic area, I'm sure you'd agree. Just a little bit of context, the Climate Commission for UK FE, HE leaders and students has been carrying out a number of priority expert witness sessions, and we've been drawing that together. And those 5 priority areas is really turning up some very interesting information and actions that we'll be reporting back on very shortly. During that process, we felt there was an opportunity, an important one, to bring people together, to bring the student voice together as well with FE colleagues and HE colleagues to sort of hear their views and also their questions. So this additional event has been put on today, and I think that's part of the Commission's work. It's evolving as it goes along. There was never going to be a set formula. We wanted to see where we would get to and what things we might need to do to gather all the opinions that really matter on this incredibly important subject. So really welcome to you. The format today is very simply, in a moment, I'm just going to ask our expert witnesses and students just to say hello and who they are very briefly, and then we'll move straight into the questions. The questions are formed from the briefing paper, and many of you, I hope, have seen the briefing paper, so we have a format for that. And then after we've worked through that, we'll then open up for more general questions. So first of all, if I could just ask our expert witnesses just to briefly say who they are, please. So perhaps if I could start with Simon, that would be lovely. Simon, welcome to you.
Hi everyone, I'm Simon Pirotte, and I'm Principal Chief Executive of Bridgend College in South Wales. It's not raining here, but it is a bit cloudy and muggy, so really pleased to be here.
Thanks, Simon. Lovely to see you. Thanks for your support as always. Brilliant. Thank you. And Jim, we heard from you earlier, Jim, but if you'd like to just say hello again, that would be lovely.
Hello, my cat's come to visit as well. This is Josh the cat, and he's gonna try and bite me at some point. But well, before he does, hello, my name's Jim. I'm the Chief Executive of something called the College Development Network in Scotland, which is a kind of development sector for the for the Scottish college sector. And I'm by no means expert, but I'll do my best. There are more expert people on this call from Scotland than me in this field, but I'll do my best to answer a few of the questions, and thank you for having me.
Lovely. Welcome, Jim. Thanks so much for joining us. And Steve.
Good morning. I'm Steve Frampton. I was a principal of a college, Portsmouth College. For the last 2 years, I've been president of the Association of Colleges. I was a chief examiner for A-level geography and wrote the people environment syllabus.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Steve. And finally, but not last but not least on our experts is Jim Longhurst. Jim.
Hi, everybody. Welcome. I'm Jim Longhurst. I'm Assistant Vice Chancellor for Environment and Sustainability at the University of the West of England. I'm the recently appointed chair of the EAUC board, and I'm a climate commissioner. And my research has over many years looked at carbon management in various guises. So very much looking forward to sharing my experiences thus far with my other panelists and with the students who are leading this session. But I'm not an expert on the college sector. There are many more skilled and able in that regard, but I'll make my contributions where they're relevant.
Thank you, Jim. And Jim, you do yourself a discredit. Your excellent work really helped us with the roadmap. It really gave us a starting point. So thank you for that. And it really captured the FE College roadmap. So thank you for your help with that. And to our students, perhaps Manveer, if you could say hello, please.
Hi everyone, I'm Manveer, and I'm a soon-to-be maths graduate from the University of Warwick, a climate commissioner, and I'm also a product officer at CDP, so an environmental disclosure NGO.
Thanks, Manveer. And Ebony is with us.
Hi, I'm Ebony and I'm a student governor at City of Bristol College.
Lovely to see you, Ebony. And Amy.
Hi, I'm Amy. I'm a student at Portsmouth College and I'm on the student union there, and I'm also a student climate commissioner.
Fantastic. Thank you all. Lovely to have you here. So we're going to move into the questions and kick things off. And Manvir, I'm going to invite you to kick us off. That's okay, with your first question to the panel, please.
Great, thank you, Ian. And yes, our first question is, what lessons has the Commission learned so far? And is this learning beneficial and relevant to the sector of FE?
Thank you. So who would like to chip in first? Steve.
Happily, but I'm going to bow to James on this with his vast experience. But I think what we have learned is in FE, there's a lot of enthusiasm, but not necessarily a lot of experience. And until very recently, a lack of good guidance, to be honest. We've lent heavily, I think, on our HE partners, particularly James. And I'm sure I would like to invite him to comment in a minute. I said until recently, until we had the roadmap, and I'd like to give a big shout really to the commissioners here and also NICE for helping us produce that. That tool's going to be a really useful way for the FE sector to go forward. I think the other thing we haven't had is we haven't had the investment for 9 years and therefore not the accountability measures of HE as well. So I think we've got a lot of learning to do from our HE partners. I think the other thing is, I think we've learned that we need to be bolder, more radical and take quicker action. Otherwise, we're going to miss some critical opportunities. So that's, I think, what the FE sector and I've learned from the process so far. But I'd really like to hand over to Jim, because I think we're in a game-changing situation now because of the roadmap, but we've got still a long way to go. James?
Well, not a huge amount, surprisingly, to add, Steve, because you've really summed up that very well. I think we've gone through a number of evidence gathering sessions, 5 in all, that were identified through discussion in the Commission about what are the priorities. And the first of those was about mobilising the voice. And I think that plays particularly into the FE sector, to use the various organisations that bring FE in Scotland, in Wales and England into a conversation, to amplify the messages that the leaders in the sector have got, but to recognise there's a huge number in that combined space that are really just beginning that journey. And I think the roadmap has made some excellent progress in helping to plot the way forward for some of those colleges that are just looking to begin that process. You're absolutely right about investment. This isn't a cost-free exercise by any means, but it is one both in terms of mitigating emissions, but also adapting to the climate changes that are simply going to happen whether we like it or not. There will be costs that have to be borne, and they will be better borne early than late. So the colleges need to get on board with that as a matter of urgency. And if that wasn't enough, that student voice. This is their lives that we're talking about. You know, a student who's going to come through FE or come out of higher education, there's got 60 odd years of life. If you look at actuary tables, they're going to be living through that climate change. So what we need to do through the Commission, and specifically in higher and FE, we need to make sure that those students are prepared through the skills and knowledge, yes, but also the aptitude and the resilience that they're going to need to cope with those changes. And what that means is we need to think about everything that a college does. Curriculum, the estate, the engagement, any investments that are the whole element of life in a college.
Thanks very much, Steve. Thanks very much, Jim. Simon, college principal, a view from you.
I'd agree with everything that's been said. Just one thing I'd add is one of the things, obviously, that's focused a lot of the conversations in recent months is the response to the COVID-19 pandemic. And again, I think the roadmap is fantastic. I think it gives us the thing that Steve was mentioning there about sort of the guidance, the kind of like a framework within which to work. But also, I think all our experiences in terms of the last few months, although we wouldn't have wished it to be, those lessons to be learned in the way that we've been learning, but still, nevertheless, if you just look at the reduction in travel, our own personal carbon footprint in terms of how we are not moving around for meetings anymore and doing things virtually. Yes, they have their limitations sometimes, but there's some really interesting conversations about new ways of working, about agile working and remote working, that we would be really foolish not to grab as we move forward into whatever the new normal looks like, I think.
Thanks, Simon. And Jim, and I appreciate, Jim, in a sense, the information that's come out for the Commission, you'll only probably be briefed on what you've seen, but any observations from that or what's happening with Scottish colleges would always be interested, Jim, if you want to just briefly comment on that with this question.
Sure. I mean, yes, I would concur with my more expert colleagues, but the one I would add that I think the Commission process itself has had a bit of a kinetic effect in Scotland, in the sense that alongside the same timeline, we've started working a bit more together across the sector about cross-sector activity and partnership. And that's probably to keep up with the pace of the work that the Commission set in train. So, you know, whilst we'll talk more about a lot of good work happening in the Scottish sector independently, it has been unilateral. It's been one college working with its funder and with its community, not necessarily the whole sector working together. So I'd say that's quite important. Looking at the roadmap, the bit that we've been wrestling with a lot of support from EAUC has been the quality of how we collect data and present it, and not just simply present it as part of our, you know, complicated funding mixture of how we're funded as a sector, but actually how we influence decision makers with collective data about the impact of our sector. And so I see in the early parts of the roadmap a lot of really good, simple stuff about how we would do that. I think that's quite an important step. And also, just looking at the roadmap, taking what looks like a nightmare apart. I mean, that's very superficial, but taking what looks like an excessively daunting task for a sector which has got so many other challenges and compartmentalizing it, just visually and graphically, I think is a really powerful instrument for non-expert leaders in this space. So I'm a fan, and I think I actually would disagree, and I think it is having a major effect, even though we haven't yet gotten engaged centrally as commissioners.
Thank you. Thanks, Jim. Thanks for that, you know, impartial and observation from a distance. Always helpful feedback. So thank you for that. Manviritz, you're on again with some questions. You're leading the way here and keeping people on their toes, which I really like. So thank you.
Yeah. So I mean, I think there's been some really interesting points. I think to sum up a few, there is that need for urgent action that Steve mentioned, and I think that's got to be at the heart of everything that we say here. And I think those lessons that we got and that we've had from the pandemic, I think we need to keep those in mind for how we move forward and be quite agile with that. And we've also had the cross-sector partnership in Scotland. I think that's a really nice example of what we need to be doing across the whole nation. And I'd like to see us moving forward, particularly with the roadmap and how we're implementing that and supporting institutions to really make that a success. I think there's a lot of reason for us to be hopeful. So yeah, those are some of my thoughts. But moving on to question 2, in terms of climate action, what are the key challenges in FE? And how do students think these should be addressed? And also, how do institutional leaders think that these should be addressed? Kind of back to you, Ian.
Thank you. So should we go, where should we go this? Or perhaps we'll start with Jim this time. I'll try and be democratic and rove it around a little bit. Jim, would you like to sort of respond initially to that one?
Okay, well, I stick more on the kind of institutional leaders side. I might end a little bit with what my perception is of the student partnership, but the observations that I would make on this, so just so people understand, all I do in Scotland is that on behalf of our principals, we have a group of principals in Scotland that meet very regularly. It's a small system so they can get together, and they have a number of groups that kind of feed into them and offer them expert support. And one of those is our climate emergency expert group. So all I do is I kind of chair a group of experts inside our sector that advise our principals on things like policy change and recommendations. And so that's why it all works beautifully. EAUC are the expert agency. We are the kind of impartial organisers. So that's my scope of interest. but also I should declare interest because I'm a board member of the Energy Saving Trust, so that may or may not be a good thing. But anyway, there we go. So my observations, there are going to be more expert people than me than speak, but our sector, it seems to me, has done the easy stuff already. So EAUC's reporting is clear about, you know, the carbon reductions that have been made in the Scottish sector are dramatic, but they are in the spaces where it's most easily done, and they're mostly just gains from network efficiencies. So the next bit is more difficult, and that was before COVID. So how do we reduce emissions from estates? Much more complicated. How do we up renewables and reduce our dependency on gas? How do we stop students travelling around in our sector, often very great distances? We have geographically huge institutions in Scotland, and we continue, and if we go back to normal, we'll continue to expect kids to spend 4 or 5 hours on a day getting to college on a bus or by a car. So that's something we've got to think about, and that's where the student partnership will come in. But I think that the big opportunity for us ahead is developing our role as anchor institutions, which we all talk about, and that's the theme across the sector. But I am already getting a lot of people wanting to come and talk to us about what the role colleges can play in the future of high streets and town centres. Mm-hmm. And what people obviously mean is, can colleges, because they seem to still be big and open, start taking on and buying up high streets and town centres and doing something in the spaces? And that's something I've been involved in for a long time. But in a broader sense, I think there is a big opportunity there, because as a sector, we're going to have to obviously deliver a lot of short course activity. In the next couple of years, we'll be asked to retrain and reskill people at speed in future-proofed or increasingly future-proof skill areas, which are obviously going to be more hopefully sustainable. So that's a great thing. So if we've got a whole new focus of the way that we teach, a whole new set of courses we might have to think about that are rapid, but then also taking our responsibility as anchor institutions in cities and towns and regions much more seriously, we can actually drive an agenda. So I'm quite optimistic about this. And I get no sense as an institutional leader in a very small way, not compared to big important principals like Simon or major presidents like Steve, but I'm a little institutional leader. I do get some sense that people don't want to go back to the way that they were delivering education 6 months ago. That is not a return journey that people want to take. So flexibility in the way we operate could be a good exemplar. So if there's a big thing that we should do next, apart from, we can get into obviously lots of stuff about the estate and all that kind of stuff, but the big thing for me is, what do we take outside the doors as an exemplar that communities that are in challenge can understand? I think we are more comprehensible for our communities on our doorsteps than big universities may be. So if we got simple roadmaps, we've got 5 things we're doing, if we've got training packages that could reskill a small or medium-sized business to be more sustainable, I think that's more consumable and will have a big impact. I'm going to stop there because that's blether, but that's kind of the focus that I would have.
It's a really good point. Thank you. I know you're absolutely right. I mean, as key institutions, and I refer back to James' very helpful analysis of the reach of universities and colleges together across the country. And we are there hopefully for the long game and have that civic role. And I think you're absolutely spot on. We've seen that in the last few months in the crisis period, how institutions have stood up and opened their doors and supported. Simon, I'm coming to you because I'm sure you'd have a view around this too.
Yeah, thanks. And just building on Jim's points there, I think one of the biggest challenges is either in terms of leadership or in terms of how we've been forced to think in it as FE leaders, is sometimes we don't always think for the long term. We're reactive and in the moment. And I think that's one of the things we're finding now, isn't it? When the current pandemic, when we went into lockdown at the end of March, we reacted and we responded. And one of the things that we've got in Wales is the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, with a commissioner that oversees that. And I think it's quite forward-thinking legislation that's been picked up at the UN, that is encouraging leaders across the piece in the country, really, to think longer term and not when the next election is happening, where we think in 4 or 5 years of like cycles. So I think one of the challenges is to, in difficult times, and we're moving into recession and the challenges that the economy is going to face over the next couple of years, is to make sure that we don't just get locked into the moment and think longer term, and for this agenda to be part of the very fabric of our decision making. And the other challenge for me, I think, is that we don't always collaborate well. Sometimes we think more competitively. And I think to have the kind of long-term sustainable impact that we're looking for here, it does rely on collaboration and working together. What I like about the roadmap, it recognizes that everybody is starting from a different place. There are organizations that I'm in awe of that are far, way ahead of where we're at as Bridgend College. But it recognizes that, and I think it's about us actually working together and working collaboratively. Jim's point about being the anchor and the catalyst for change in our locals, our communities, is a very, very good one. So it's about our powers of persuasion, holding on to the long-term view, and not getting dragged down into short-termism and short-term thinking. And just finally, if I may, we've seen some really interesting engagement of learners, some who maybe have been less engaged in face-to-face learning, that have really responded really well to remote and agile sort of working. And again, that's something for us to really consider, isn't it, in terms of the models that we use in the future. The kinds of buildings we make, in fact, if we even build buildings to the same extent like in the future, it will all change, won't it, in terms of how we're now thinking about operating.
Right. Thank you very much, Simon. And that segues very nicely into James, who I know has had a massive, comprehensive site and facilities sort of plan going full steam ahead at UE. So James, over to you. Any thoughts around that, either leading on from what Simon's just mentioned in that civic place or that wider responsibility?
Yeah, I mean, anybody who's interested in what UWE has done, I'd just say come to our university website. You can download our sustainability plan and you can see how we've embedded that. But thinking more specifically about FE, I think for me this is about individual colleges and the combinations in the different parts of the United Kingdom, really understanding the urgency of the climate problem, but then being proactive. And the roadmap is now there as a way to move the thinking forward, whether you're very early in that process, established or leading. It's about using the advantages you now have through that roadmap to think about the points of engagement with the different constituencies, with students, with staff, with those that supply to you, with those that are in your hinterland, and to think about how messages can be amplified through individual and collective action, and how you can use individual influencing as well as organizational influencing through working in that collaborative way that Jim and Steve Simon were talking about. And I think I would just point you to one piece of evidence, because I think the question was also about what students think about all of this. And the only piece of evidence I can point to you is a piece of work that the Students Organising for Sustainability, SOS, the NUS charity for sustainability, recently published a survey that they did of 1,000 students. They were university students and FE students. And overwhelming percentage are saying we want to build back better. Post-COVID has to be a green recovery. We want to see that green recovery move quickly. And FE has a huge opportunity in reskilling and upskilling, but also making the choices about a green recovery rather than a carbon recovery.
Thanks very much, James. I see a lot of people nodding, a lot of really positive points about that. Thank you. Thanks very much. Steve, I'll ask you to finish off in responding from the panel to this question from Manvir. Thank you.
What can you add, really?
Yeah,
I mean,
that's
the thing. But what I would say is, isn't it encouraging from Simon and Jim's point of view that this is an agenda that goes beyond England? This is an agenda that affects us all. And I think there's a lot of lessons that we can learn from each other, and there's a lot more that we will achieve working collaboratively across Scotland, Wales and England on this agenda. I thought that was hugely heartening. In the chat, there's a lot of comments, and we can go back to roadmap and investment and all the other issues. I'd like to just perhaps try and pick up on a couple of new things, really. The first is the world will not be the same again. FE will not be the same again. What will the new normal look like? I think there's a danger that we use the word normal. I think it's likely to be a rapidly evolving situation. And certainly there'll be a lot more blended and online learning, at least in the short term, somewhere between 20 and 50% of the sector, according to the group that I chair about reopening colleges. And I've just been responsible for the publication of a new book with the AOC and UFI on EdTech and the lessons learned from COVID and what we're going to do going forward. And it picks up on the points that the panel were talking about. It's available on Amazon, and I think it is about the lessons that we learn. It's an ebook, so it's free to everybody, and it's really about how we take the opportunities to do things differently. And the key beneficiary will be the climate. I also think actually the mental health of the profession and young people as well, if we get it right. I think I've got one perspective on the sort of student agenda is, and we ought not just to be thinking about our current students and our past students, but we ought to be thinking about our future students, those in the primary and secondary sector. And like Jim, I think if you look at that NUS data, or you look at the data coming out from student voice panels in the cities of our country, this overwhelmingly is the most significant, if we park COVID as a temporary, the most significant long-term challenge that they see. Do we really want to be an unresponsive sector that welcomes students who are currently in the primary and secondary sector and have a totally inappropriate curriculum? What I would argue is we need a very radical review of the curriculum. And I do mean tooth and nail, radical review of the curriculum, which makes it very relevant to the primary and secondary school pupils of our nation by the time they arrive in the FE and the HE sector. And if it's not values-led, and if it's not relevant, I suspect that young people will take less formal action, and that could be a complexity for us all. We're here to serve those people in those communities, to be agile and responsive, collaborative, and meet their needs. But if we don't have the right curriculum, I think we're falling down. But it's a little bit arrogant, actually, and with great respect to Jim and Simon and James, for us to be answering this question. Why on earth aren't we inviting Ebony and Amy to answer the question on what do students think that the issues are? So I would, Chair, with your permission, I'd like to suggest we ask Amy and Ebony for their thoughts on it, really.
Perfect. Thank you, Steve. Lovely. Well, Ebony, you're on next. So there's the challenge for you from Steve.
To me, I really think that colleges aren't going to see a normal again. Like, I went into college the other week to do an exam and it was completely weird, and I think we'll have to stick with blended learning for a long time. But my next question leads quite nicely into what we've just spoke on about what do our current and future students really want us to do, and have we captured this in the climate action roadmap colleges?
Thank you. Thanks, Ebony, and nicely put together for us there. Simon, can I come back to you on this one, if that's okay? Because obviously being a college principal and trying to balance everything that you need to do and drive the institution forward, it is about the curriculum. What's your thoughts about that, really, in response to Ebony's question?
Well, on curriculum, I totally agree with Steve. It's really interesting in terms of certain courses, certain vocational courses. You can see that this agenda is really embedded, but in others, less so. And it really needs, we deliver what awarding bodies say we need to deliver. And if it isn't front and center in their thinking, then that's always going to influence what's actually on what learners receive. On the receiving end, if you like, of that sort of guidance and learning, teaching and learning. So I think that's really important. But coming back to Ebony's question as well, students really want us to do something. We have student governors that hold me to account. They want to know sort of what is the college doing, how are we actually moving forward on this, and in terms of our decision making. In terms of replacement of fleet of cars, does it need replacing at all? And if so, what kind of vehicles are we actually going to be using in the future? All those decisions that we make at the highest level in the college, up to like governing body, We have quite a strong student voice for student governors. We have student ambassadors. I meet regularly with them, and this is pretty much top of their agenda, I have to say. So we've got to listen to that, and we've got to respond to that.
Thank you, Simon. Thank you. Any other expert witnesses want to comment on that, or I'll move on to and bring Amy in. Is there any other points you want to raise on Ebony's question there? Because I think we've covered the roadmap. Steve, please come in.
Yeah, I think I totally agree with Simon. We at the moment, and I think HE are probably true as to say that a lot of what we do is directed by other people. I think one of the things that we've really got to do is to try and see how we can influence that agenda. And I think we've got some potentially powerful allies. I think Ofsted was once a tool that the sector was beaten by. I think the new framework is truly educational. And I think we have really good educators in that organisation now who are interested, not in jobs, but in education. And I think we ought to be, and young people ought to be working with them. They have an opportunity at every inspection through the student voice mechanism to make their voices heard loud and clear. And I think if that was articulated at every college inspection over the next 2 years, Ofsted would respond in the same way they responded to the prevent agenda and safeguarding agenda and made it a statutory part of every inspection. I think we've also got to try and influence another group that are really hard to reach, which are the boards that set the curriculum in some of those vocational areas. But we've got to be really brave on this, and I think it's mandatory for us to challenge in those areas and to say it's got to be appropriate to meet the future needs of our students. The other thing I'd like it all to be done is in a co-constructed way. I think it's incredibly arrogant for us, well, I'll talk for me, in my generation, to think we've got all the answers. It seems to me we've caused a lot of the problems. I think it would be absolutely great if we started in a different way when we look at the curriculum of involving young people. And if we really do believe that we can't involve people of the ages of 7, 8 and 9 in this, I think we're terribly misguided. I think they're very, very clear on what sort of world they want to go into, what sort of curriculum, and I think we should be engaging, and that certainly leaves the door open then for older students, particularly my own FE students and HE students as well.
Thanks, Steve. And that leads very nicely on to Amy's question she wants to put to the panel.
I think Jim had his hand up and he's been waving at you.
Sorry, Jim. There you are, got you. Okay, come in.
Thanks very much. I just briefly a light on Steve's primary school point. Colleagues from Scotland will know I do a highly scientific focus group each year with a group of primary school students to inform my thinking and presentations. Some of them may involve my own children, but there is a wider group of Glasgow primary school kids who've been tracked in a focus group environment from the age of P1, which is kind of 6 or 6 or 7, up now to P4, which is 10. And the non-joking part is that they are asked in return for ice cream to give me a variety of answers, one of which is to visualise how we could improve college to reflect their own educational experiences and aspirations pictorially. So as a little group of people around the kitchen table, once a year, they're asked to find pictures that demonstrate what they would hope for the future. And where they're at now is that the 10 pictures that they produce of things that they find on Google Images or whatever that they want, 3 of them are about digital. The last one was before COVID. 3 of them are about digital education. So gamified learning, more sort of some dog type challenge learning. 4 of them are about environmental change. So making the college that they sort of vaguely have an idea of what college might be like, their own primary school, but making it a bit greener, making sure there's outdoor play that feels greener, making sure there's a turbine, that kind of stuff. But the rest of them are about mental health. And they are about, can the kids take dogs into classes? That's a common one. It comes up every year. So, pet assisted learning to reduce anxiety. But when you challenge them, the mental health ones are related to the climate ones. So this is a very roundabout, leathery kind of, Johnsonian way of getting to my point, which is the bit in the roadmap I'd like to see more of is the relationship, the behavioural relationship between our climate response as institutions, student mental health and then their performance. If we want to influence decision makers who are bothered about bums on seats, qualifications, all that kind of stuff, we've got to show them if we don't do this stuff better, our students will do worse. We as staff will not be able to educate them as effectively, and the whole system will spiral in all kinds of ways. And I think that's a really important bit of addition to make. There are obviously really important things we need to do for just good, virtuous reasons, but there are good influencing points to be made by doing that. And Steve is dead right. This discussion is absolutely ready to be had at primary level and onwards. This is not something we need to wait until our students are kind of 15, 16 before we can interact with them at all. Thanks.
No, thank you. Very passionate and spot on. Thanks, Jim. Thank you for that. I'm sorry I missed your hand wave there. So just following on from that, Amy, I mean, you used the word co-construct in your question. It's really important. And so if you could lead on that, and then what I might do is just go off piste after your input and bring in Eddie Playfair, if I may, who's done some excellent work for us on Priority 5 around this sort of curriculum and the development of that. So Amy, if you could pose your question, that'd be lovely. Thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to quickly say, I think I completely agree about the idea of including mental health, because it is so closely interlinked with all these environmental issues. And I think that the roadmap, if like mental health is included as well, it will allow students to see that colleges are doing things, and then that we can work with the colleges rather than like trying to fight against what they're doing. So I just thought that was a really good point to include. So the question was, how can students and colleges co-construct a response? So we said all of the things that like need to be done, but how can they be done in a way where students and colleges co-construct it?
Thanks, Amy. And Eddie, could I bring you in first before I perhaps go to other panel members, because of the recent work you've done in supporting the Commission on Priority 5, education and the student experience. Thanks, Eddie.
Yes, thanks very much, Ian. I've been thinking a bit about what's holding us back in the curriculum, and as Steve and others have said, I mean, our problem really is that in FE, particularly in England, what we teach is entirely driven by qualification, the requirements of qualifications and their specifications, and everything about the system, funding, accountability, etc., is very, very much driven by that. So there's very, very tiny space for some kind of common entitlement. I mean, the programs of study say very little about what that common entitlement should be. And as Steve said, Ofsted, the new Ofsted framework does start to kind of carve out a bit of a, you know, personal and social development space for students. So I think there's some hope there. But really, I mean, the answer is that the pressure has to be from the bottom up. The pressure has to be, and it is coming from students themselves, from colleges themselves. And in a sense, what AOC can do is to help to support that and resource that and link that with, you know, global initiatives like Education for Sustainable Development and national initiatives through EAUC, and some of the really good practice that's happening in colleges, but also in the other nations, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. So I think we can't wait for government to say, okay, we're going to change the curriculum. I think we have to say, well, actually, we have to do something, and ESD and a number of other things, I think, but certainly ESD has to be part of a student entitlement, regardless of what course they're following, whether they're studying plumbing or A-level, you know, A-level geography. And I was very struck. I mean, Amy hasn't mentioned this, but there was a really, I was lucky enough to sit in on a UNESCO Futures of Education sort of consultation event with students, mostly HE students, but it was chaired by an FE student and Amy, and it was, and I just thought the level of, you know, the quality of contributions and the level of ideas around how the curriculum could change, what they wanted from their education, what could have been done, you know, prior to their, you know, what could have been done at school and college for them, both in terms of content, but also in terms of preparing them to be, you know, to understand sustainability and understand interconnectedness and global issues, was really, it was a really high level. And I wish that, you know, ministers and civil servants could have heard that conversation, but I think we'll make sure that we put that sort of evidence in front of them. So I don't know if that's helpful, Ian, but that's just a few thoughts around the student, around the kind of bottom-up process, which we're kind of trying to encourage.
That's really helpful. Thanks so much, Eddie. And I think one of the things that we've seen through the last few months, where there hasn't been as much guidance as institutions would expect from government, so leaders have taken the initiative and basically done, I'm going to do the right thing that I know is right for our students. And I think that's been quite empowering for many leaders to say, there isn't the definitive guide in leading what I need to do. And where things are critical and important, I will make those decisions and I will make those changes. And I think we all hope that many leaders will take the same approach with climate and say, we will make this whole agenda fit within the curriculum offer. James, can I bring you in? I mean, it's something I know you raised right in a very early conversation we had when we first met as commissioners about the role, the flexibility, and how we can adapt the curriculum, and that feed through from school, FE, and into HE, and how you see it from an HE perspective.
Okay, well, co-production absolutely has to invite the student voice. It has to respect the observations that students bring in, and to demonstrate how that voice that's been articulated in the co-production process has actually led to change. So what we mustn't have is tokenism, where there's simply a structure that makes it look like it matters, but the reality is we go off and do what we want to do, irrespective of what we've said. So being open, being transparent, making it clear that co-production is a model that an institution believes in. It wants to listen. It's open and does the rather dangerous thing, which is we don't have the answers. But between us, we might be able to better understand the problem and go some way towards making what we hope is the right decision. And then we have to follow through. And we have to follow through, not, okay, I'm going to do this now. Thanks for your voice being raised there, Miss or Mr. Student. What we need to do is to continue the co-production into co-implementation and in the review process and in the adjustments we make. In other words, it's not just a one-off tick. The roadmap says engage with the student voice. We've done that. I can move on to the next bit. This is about the culture that exists within an individual institution, but then it has to go through the various organisations that colleges in different parts of the UK belong to. That model, when you get all the way up to the AOC or in the Scottish or Welsh equivalents, the voice of the student needs to be in there in some of those higher level conversations where policy or opportunity is being reflected upon and directed. Really make it mean something, because we don't have all the answers, and we may in fact be creating more problems by thinking that we do.
Thank you. Thanks very much, James. That's really helpful and spot on. I can see lots of people thumbs up and good comments in the chat on that one. Thank you. Amy, I hope that sort of reassured you as a student that there is the passion and commitment there. And I know you've got one final question on behalf of the student panel to ask, and then we'll open it up for comments from everyone. So if you'd like to ask that question, please, and then I'll pick on one of our experts, so keep them on their toes, shall we? Amy.
Yeah, I completely agree. Actually, it does give me a bit more confidence. Shows that institutions do actually want to do things, and I think it also makes students feel more empowered if they know that what they're doing will actually make a difference, rather than just like saying things and then it being kind of brushed off like, yeah, okay, thank you. So yeah, the last question that I have is, what are our next steps for colleges, and what is the plan for the end of this year going into next year?
Yeah, thank you very much. That's lovely. So I'm going to go to Steve.
I better unmute first. I think it's a great question. I think we've got a roadmap now, which is so important, and we're engaging Treasury in the debate about investment now. So I think if you listen to all the other things, I think what James just said about not just co-construction, but working collaboratively with students all the way through the process is vital. But what I think we need to do is we need to implement it now, don't we? We've got one, now let's get on and do it. Let's clearly decide what the priorities are at an institutional level. Let's support governors and principals and student governors and student unions to implement it. I think we'll need a series of webinars that the AOC can produce with partners to support that implementation now. I think colleges, and I'm talking about peers supporting peers now. As Jim says, we haven't got all the answers and all the expertise here, but I think from webinars and the networks that we can set up, we can enable that to happen. I think we've got big opportunities to review progress in November and February with 2 big annual events that the AOC have. But I think it's around working collaboratively, being agile, doing the work on behalf of our communities that's absolutely vital. But let's get on and really get cracking on this agenda now, but let's make sure it's well supported.
Thanks, Steve. I'm moving straight to Simon, please.
Thank you. I agree. We just need to get on with it. If I look at my organisation in our most recent strategic plan, we just signed off for 2020 to 25. This agenda is much more front and centre than it has been in our previous one. And because it's there in front and centre, it gets measured. There are KPIs, they go right the way through to all our management meetings, right the way through to the governing body. So nobody can avoid it. It's there and it has to be addressed. I was really struck as well by James's point around tokenism. And it's interesting, isn't it? When we have big decisions to make as an organisation, we will have an equality impact assessment. And for me, how much does climate change and sustainability feature in some of those big decisions we make, but also the smaller ones as well, to ensure that it's just part of the very fabric of our decision making. And it's about having everybody, not just sort of like the missionary that we have in every organisation, or the group of missionaries that take this agenda really, really seriously, but it being part of the fabric of everybody. So every decision that we're making, from small, tiny little things, right the way through to the big decisions that an organisation, that we're thinking about that. And I totally agree, following into the point, James's point about culture. It was Drucker, wasn't it, said the culture eats strategy for breakfast. I've seen so many plans and, where people have the best intentions or whatever, but it gets parked. It has to be part of the culture of an organisation and what we say about our values, about our mission, and about who we are. So that, for me, personally, in my college, is the next step, is we've made it front and centre in terms of the words and the strategy, but it's about living and breathing it now, and being true to those words is the next phase for me.
Thanks very much. That's lovely. Thanks, Simon. That's brilliant. Thank you. Jim, I'm going to come to you next, then to James. Jim.
Oh, that was quite a peroration. I don't think I can match that. But I'm also going to take a step back to Amy's part. I think the quality of a more deliberative student voice in this process is really important. And I think a major weakness of the work I've been doing is that I think the student voice is currently, from my point of view, a bit tokenistic. So might have an agency on my groups. I might have an NUS, or for us a Sparks, which is about student leadership on our groups. And I think often student members of boards in some of institutions probably feel like they're the student representative, but they're also talking about student stuff like climate. That's what their role is on the board, and that's not good either. So I think that there might be a discussion about a kind of citizens jury, citizens panel approach that brings the whole range of the student voice. We don't use the term FE as much in Scotland because we're doing HE provision across the sector too. So they're much more kind of blended polytechnic institutions in Scotland. So what is a student in a Scottish college is a kind of massively wide-ranging thing. So getting all of those voices into the discussion, I think, would be really important. So I'm kind of on that one too. In terms of what we need to do next, so we've got 250,000 students turning up to college, sort of, in about a month's time, 6 weeks' time in Scotland. And for the first time, we have a post-COVID new cohort of students. Student recruitment's actually gone quite well. Formal recruitment this year. Lots of students are coming of their own volition, which is fantastic. But they're the first cohort arriving, not with COVID and the lockdown having been something that's happened mid-course, there might be a lot of them coming new to the college, wanting to know what the institutions are about. And I think as they arrive to institutions that physically look different, that might teach differently, that might blend, that might have a whole different approach, I think they need to have some confidence that this is part of a plan, that our climate response is part of a plan and not simply a whole lot of kind of slightly chaotic things happening all in a jumble. And I've been following Eddie's contributions in the chat about the ESD. I think that's really important. We do not have that. And as we pivot to micro-credentialing, as I was mentioning earlier, kind of short course provision, having some core content in each of our courses that is about sustainable practice in the curriculum, I think that's critical. And I'd like to talk about that further after the session. But so those things for me are exercising my mind. How does the Commission get landed as part of our wider strategy when students come back in not a lot of time in part of our discussion and we start to do their inductions? And the last point would just be to finish from me on where Steve was. I think there is a major appetite on this agenda and on a more for colleges and the sectors across the UK to work together. You know, that devolution doesn't mean that we can't do that. This is clearly understood to be a shared international brief. You know, Scotland may well be the leader. We know that. We're used to that. But we're happy to work with others and contribute and participate effectively as partners. So we'd like to get more involved in the Commission and the discussion into the future. Thank you.
We'd very, very much welcome that. And I think what you pointed out there is spot on. And I'm sure James will comment on this in a moment as we wrap up this part, is that the whole point about the Commission coming together was HE and FE. It very much was a seamless approach, and having all the partners in one place. It's the first time we believe that's ever been achieved. So it was a really major step forward there. James, over to you to sort of pull this little bit to a close, please. And thank you.
If I could just make one point in reference to what Jim was saying, and then come back to the question. The point, sure. The point in response to Jim is that the higher education sector, through work that I'm involved with Advanced HE and the QAA, is refreshing and updating the guidance document for higher education on education for sustainable development. Principally, that's about how do we make it woven through everything, whether it's midwifery or geography or anything in between. How do we make sure it's part of that experience? So that document should be ready towards October, November time. And why don't the three nations that coordinate their respective FE, why don't you pick that up collectively and make that an FE version that can work for all of you? Some of it is useful already, but you'll need to contextualize it. So, and as one of the co-chairs of that group, I'd be happy to work with you if that was helpful. But specifically, and going back to the question, a couple of observations about FE and then an observation for students. First thing is be brave. Get on with it. And if you're not getting on with it, then the student voice needs to be raised. And to use a very old phrase that some might recognize, students need to park their lawns on the park their tanks on the principal's lawn and to demand that action be taken. But let's be co-production rather than parking tanks. And I think there's an engagement point here. There's been bits coming up in the chat about how do we reach out to uncommitted, those who haven't quite got it. Well, there's a lot in the roadmap that's going to help us there, but actually there's a role for each college. You have neighbours. Reach out to those neighbours. If you're doing something, don't keep it secret. Share it with them. Don't keep it to yourself. Let's really pick up that point that this is collaborative, and the synergies that can emerge out of collaborating will make the urgency that we need to address this so much more real. So I think those are my points. Students, keep your voices loud, show that it matters to you, make sure that in those representative fora that a college will have, use your voice. And if the voice isn't being heard, then find ways to make it clear that your voice should be heard, because it is your future that experience in FE is all about. And if it isn't working for you, it needs to change. And I think we've heard a huge amount, Ian, about willingness to change here. But my sadness is that we have the committed online.
Yes. Yeah.
There's
Well,
a
I
lot
think
we have to reach out to.
thanks
And that's
so
true
much.
of HE as well. By no means is it perfect in HE. If Joy was still with us, I'm sure she would be agreeing with that statement.
No, that's a very good point, and I think it's something at the next commissioners meeting next week we might want to pick up again, because I think that's a really fair challenge. Thanks very much, James. So Ebony, Amy, and Manvir, thanks so much for the thought you put into those questions, which has sparked a really good response. I hope you felt reassured on behalf of a student body that it is being taken very seriously. I think as we move into the open questions, I'd like to bring in Lawrence Fruin, if I may, who posed a really important question that fits that, about the converted and the unconverted. So Lawrence, welcome to you. Lovely to see you, a college principal, and your view and your question, please, Lawrence.
Thanks, Ian. Yeah, it's great to hear. Brilliant discussion. It's really good to hear from everyone and from students especially. I think it's about how we bring everybody on board. The curriculum is really important. That's what we do as educators, and I think that's something that we've probably not done as well as we should do over the years. But for me, is that there's a wider piece about bringing everyone along, making sure that we work with our community as anchor institutions to change the way we think and behave as well. So I'm just interested how we bring that alive outside of the FE and the HE sectors as well, and what people think, students particularly, but what we all think that colleges can do to make that happen.
Thanks for that. Anybody like to sort of respond, or any thoughts on that one? Thanks, Steve.
Thanks, Lawrence. It's a really good question, isn't it? And I think to start with, we've now got a roadmap that's accessible to everybody. I think a lot of people would have used the excuse, it's ignorance. We don't know what to do. Well, that's disappeared now. I think the second thing is we've got to get rid of the investment problem, and the capital funding does allow us to do that now. There's resource that we've got that can do it. So I think we're dismantling the excuses, if you like, first, because I think it's a sticks and carrots thing. If people think we don't know what to do and we haven't got the funding to do it, well, they're gone now. And I think now what we've got now is a situation where you've got the roadmap, we've got some investment, now let's get on and do it. I think we've got to be smart, though. I think behaviours in the FE sector are nearly always influenced by policy, although I think that's quite a weak one, but certainly Ofsted and certainly by funding mechanisms. So I really do believe over the next couple of years, Ofsted will turn into a force for good on this, and it'll be an expectation that we listen to student voices. It's embedded in our curriculum, and I think that will force change. But I think that the thing is, my experience of FE is they're incredibly willing to adapt and make change if it's in the interest of their communities and their students. And I believe that students can have a very, very powerful role here, particularly student governors and student unions, but they often need supporting and particularly, I think, training in order to work with their boards. And so it's not seen as that narrow agenda and tokenism that people have talked about. So one of the things that we'll be doing next year as an AOC is working with an organisation called Unlock to develop the skills and the talents of student governors by providing regular online, obviously at the moment, support and training for them. And one of the things we've asked that organisation to focus on is the implementation of the roadmap. So I think it can be student driven. I think the sector, like I say, is full of incredibly passionate and professional people who want to do a good job. And I think what we've got to do is to make sure we see this as core. I think it was Simon who said it's got to be embedded in our structural work now, those plans. But I think the long-term sustainability and success of this will be, can we get that cultural buy-in from everybody? Because sticks, I think, aren't gonna help. I think we've got to have it so that it is cultural and it's driven by students and those ambassadors. But I think, Lawrence, people like yourself really have got a powerful voice to play with your peers as well. And I think in those regional groups that you belong to and the national groups as well, I think we've got to have advocates like yourself and the other 20 or 30 principals who are passionate about this agenda, put their head above the parapet and saying, and not necessarily in a deconstructive way, but what are we doing on this? We've got the tools now. How can we work together regionally, nationally, and as we've heard today, internationally on this agenda? Because this is the first, I think, non-competitive agenda we've had for a long time. It's not about student numbers. We're all in this together, and it's important that we all get it right. So thank you for the question.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Steve, and thanks, Lawrence, for the question. I know Phil's itching to come in on this one. Phil, can I bring you in there?
Yeah, thank you. I've got a question for the commissioners, and then hopefully a few kind of helpful suggestions for consideration. So we've talked a lot about reaching out. I'm curious as to the work that's been done in understanding the needs of the unconverted, i.e. how they view the world. Because as teachers, English and maths is probably a really good example. The first thing we do is understand the needs of our particular students. So my question for the commissioners is really around what work has been done to understand the needs of those that are not converted. Perhaps more helpfully, first of all, I'd like to commend the Commission. The first meeting I went to, which was down in London, felt really exclusive. It felt as though, and forgive me if colleagues were there, I don't mean any offence, it was a group of experts comparing their expertise. It's now moved to a point where it feels really inclusive so that people like myself who aren't experts can actually engage in a meaningful way, and I think the Commission should be commended for that. Steve mentioned a paper or a document around lessons from COVID. I'm curious, not necessarily for now, for the Commission to consider whether that document could be presented through the lens of sustainability, and that there are many, many easy wins, going back to what Simon said at the start around new ways of working. I think the roadmap is amazing. I had an opportunity, we ran a middle leaders program, and one of the middle leaders had got hold of the roadmap, had interpreted the roadmap, presented the roadmap back to a group of senior managers, including myself, as a way forward from for the college. And I thought that was just amazing. I'm curious as to whether, and I suspect it's possible, although it may be challenging, under each of the boxes, whether we could have a case study / best practice, a real example. So as a principal or a chief exec, whatever, who is an expert, I can look at the roadmap, and at a link, I could go immediately into an example of another college. And I think the examples are there, where I'd say, okay, so that's what this really means to me. So a question for the commissioners, it may seem a long time ago, my question now, I guess, but a question for the commissioners, and then a few suggestions for the commission to consider.
Lovely. Phil, look, thanks. I mean, your constructive challenge on all the way through this has been so helpful to us. We really appreciate it. And you've been a great advocate as well. Delighted that the roadmap has been picked up by those in the engine room who will make it happen. So it's fantastic news. Thanks for that feedback. And also the ideas, we'll capture those certainly about how we can get that good practice examples. I know through our friends EAUC, there is a lot of good information. I'm sure we can link that up, so we'll definitely do that. Steve, can I bring you in, and James, both as commissioners? Steve first. The question was really a challenge back to the commissioners. So, Steve, could you respond there to Phil's point, please?
Yeah, I'll pick up on Phil. You're absolutely right about the. I'll give a plug to UFI because they paid the bill for the UFI AOC EdTech publication. And it can very much be reviewed through a sustainability agenda. I think it can be reviewed through a curriculum agenda, a mental health agenda, and a sustainability agenda, because surely a lot of the lessons and the pain that we've gone through, why would we waste a good crisis? I mean, crises are there to learn from, surely. And if we were to go back to the situation we had before, I think we'd be wasting a massive opportunity. I think someone's already said today, we've got powerful evidence that in some colleges, attendance actually improved during COVID. And we've got powerful evidence that certain sorts of learners really enjoyed that experience. And we've also got some very powerful evidence actually that we need to probably support some of our incredibly hard-working professional staff who are brilliant face-to-face learners with a bit of support to enable them to become really good blended and online learners as well. But why would we waste that? And you're quite right. And the publication does talk about those things because there are real net gains as we go forward to actually continuing some of the enforced practices that we had. I mean, particularly, I think around, I mean, how many more national meetings will we have when we can do at least 80% of them online more effectively, without all of those transport implications, really. I mean, to give you just one example. So I think your point, Phil, about the fact that I think we've moved from exclusivity through inclusivity, and it's largely due to the people that are on the panel today and the principals in the sector. It's people like Jim and Simon and James, because I agree with you. I think we did, to a certain extent, start off in the wrong place. And I'm really pleased with your comments, really, and also to hear that it's filtering down, as Ian put it, into the engine room. And that's what we need to do. We need to have more advocates like yourself and Lawrence and other principals in the sector who found this really, really useful. So thank you.
Thanks very much, Steve. James, can I bring you in on that, please?
Yeah, I think fair challenge, Phil, and I'm glad you feel that the way we've engaged over the last, I don't know what it is, 10 months has really opened out and enabled people to feel part of it and to recognise it's for them, not an exclusive club. And you have to tell us if we fall back into old habits, because that is not our intention. I think your point about understanding the unconverted and what can make it possible for them to move. I think there's things that we, and the we here is the whole collective of the sector. It's about sharing examples, how you get the easy entry points. And I know EAUC, I think Fiona's already put something in the chat about the intention to add examples as they become relevant. But in preparation for the work that NOUS did, a whole raft of resources were pulled together, and I think they are all available on the EAUC website, and perhaps Fiona could pop in the chat where that link can be found. And I think it was also in the briefing note. We've got a lot already. It's about how that gets to the people it needs to get to and how they can have help to understand what does this mean? What are you asking me to do? And how do you make the entry into it easier? And I think we need to find ways that can support that. And that's what we can do. But there are other things. I think every college at least will be in a local authority that's already declared a climate emergency. And those colleges can help the local authority by their own actions. But actually there's a lot of local authorities here, if I'm brutal, don't actually know what to do next. They've done the token bit, but it's the shift. So there's something that colleges that are perhaps, if I use the sort of the language that was used in the roadmap, those established or leading colleges can help shape the work that a local authority does in respect of their climate emergency. But those climate emergency declaring local authorities who are advanced and are actually making changes, they're going to push their college sector colleagues to actually make change. So my advice would be to get on board early and to be an actor that helps shape change rather than having it imposed on you.
Thanks, James. Absolutely. Thank you very much. Colleagues, I mean, I'm looking across the screens. Has anybody got a question they would like to? John, I think you have a question there. You've just popped up on the screen. Thank you, John. Could I bring you in? Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, I put my hand up. I'm not sure how it's working with the hands up thing, but
Sorry, I think I'm only seeing one screen, so that's probably my fault.
Don't worry about it. We got there. That's great. I mean, this has been tremendously interesting and I think really very useful, which is excellent. I will blow the Scottish trumpet. In spite of my accent, I'm in Scottish and I work at Fife College. Scotland is actually well ahead of the curve. Jim's being falsely modest when he says we may be. We really are. And it's not all our fault, in fairness. Some of it is down to the legislation that has been introduced, the Climate Change Scotland Act, and some of it is down to the public bodies' climate change duties, which have been imposed upon all public bodies in Scotland. Although, if I'm honest with you, I don't think they've been imposed as much as they could be so far, but they have been imposed to an extent. One of the key things that feeds into the roadmap from that is the measuring current emissions. All public bodies in Scotland since 2015 have had to report on our carbon emissions to the Scottish Government. So this is a very well established, although probably going to change shortly, but it's an established reporting mechanism that I would suggest any colleges or other public bodies who want to look at their emissions, just borrow it. I mean, it's an Excel spreadsheet. You can put factors in and away you go. And that makes for a commonality of reporting. The danger is that people measure their emissions using different formats, different systems, and then you don't get a comparable package of measures there. So that would be my first recommendation. The second one is regarding peer support. Again, blowing the Scottish EAUC trumpet, we have a Sustainability for Smaller Institutions subgroup of EAUC Scotland, which is what it says on the tin. So it's primarily colleges with a couple of small universities as well. And we sit down and discuss common problems and common resolutions to those problems and challenges. And that has worked really, really well because Scottish colleges are all faced with the same problems, one of which is that we can't borrow under SALIX funding. So we're all trying to do things on a very limited budget. I think the comment regarding place-based solutions is really important as well. And again, in Fife, what we have and has been working to some extent, but hopefully will work better, is something called Fife Environmental Partnership, which includes Fife College, St Andrews University, Fife Council, Fife NHS, SNH, a whole raft of Fife-based public bodies. And we work together to try and collaborate rather than compete. And that's, I think, really important. I think Steve's point regarding the curriculum is vital. I mean, a lot of what I've just talked about is, if you like, trying not to be a problem for the environment and climate change, so reducing our emissions, etc. I think if we look at the other half of that coin, which is trying to be the solution, that can only come through curriculum that actually trains our students for the futures that will be in front of them after this crisis, I suppose. The green recovery, everybody's talking about opening up a green economy, but where are we teaching students on heat pump technologies and other technologies that are coming to the forefront now? I mean, at Fife College, we're still teaching, gas boiler installation, which is fine. People are still having gas boilers installed and they will need them maintaining for a decade or more. But, we're moving into heat pumps as well. But where's the curriculum support for that type of thing? So I suppose not so much a question, but really a few thoughts. But I mean, I'm sure through EAUC, working through EAUC Scotland, the information that we have here that could be shared would be shared, and the expertise we have here would be shared as well. So I think there's a lot to learn. Let's not reinvent wheels. We haven't got time. We already have quite a few wheels that are doing a good job. If we just need to change the spokes on them a bit, let's just do that.
Lovely. Thanks very much, John. That's really helpful and a very kind offer, which we'll definitely take you up on. And I think that is the point, isn't it, Jim? That I think, when we look across the UK and the work that, the Scottish colleges have done, and also in Wales and in Ireland as well. I mean, it's not just, we are bringing people together in a kind of four nations type approach to this, and I think that's really powerful, Jim. Would you agree?
I would just don't use the nation word. Just leave that one to one side. But apart from that, yeah, I totally agree, and I agree with John as well. But I was, as he was talking about the great examples there, I was going back to Phil's comment. I'm sorry I dropped out for a moment. We had a power cut in Glasgow, and if that doesn't tell you something, then nothing will. But I'm back in now. I came in when Phil was talking about that idea of putting some best practice examples in and around the roadmap, so you can just click through. And that, as John was talking, that made me think, really important point here about, as we share case studies and best practice examples and innovations, it's how you get to the second tier ones that always interest me. Because we're a great sector for, we've got the best college, we've got the best one of this in the world, we've got super one of this, we've got the best one, and that's great. But if you're a leader trying to, or you're a student leader, or you're a college leader trying to turn around an institution that's not quite got an agenda, you want to know what quite crap to good looks like. You don't want to know what I've been world class and I still am is. And that's really important in building case study examples, is how you get to colleges that have made a really major transition. That's where the change will come, is if we can take our whole sector to a place of being good, rather than being, a couple of institutions been outstanding. And Fife College, don't get me wrong, John, is outstanding. I wasn't talking about you. You're lovely and outstanding in every possible way. As a former Fifer, I can say that. But there are places that are doing incredibly innovative things, that are trying to introduce, major new sustainability programs. We've got automotive departments in Scotland that have no way of training people on how to work with electric vehicles. So we're still producing mechanics left, right, and centre who only know how to hit an old-fashioned engine. That's a problem. But they're still doing creative and innovative things in industry. Those are the kind of college best practice examples you'd want to share across the country. So it was just a plea, we'd like to help. If we're going to feed into a case study bank, let's have some of those, good to great stories, rather than just I've always been great, and I'm proud to tell you about it.
Thanks, Jim, and thanks, John. I'm going to move to Simon to sort of just have the final point on this one. Simon?
Yeah, I feel like I need to fly the flag for Wales now. But really interesting discussion. But I'd quite like to come back to Lawrence's question, if I may, which I thought was a really, really good question. It is something that sort of, I suppose, we all wrestle with in all aspects of working organisations, isn't it? Is how do you bring the doubting Thomases with you? And one of the things that I think that I've learned over the years through like trial and error is that old Aesop fable, the argument between the sun and the wind about who can get the guy's jacket off, and the wind tries to blow it off, and the more the wind blows, the guy holds on to his jacket tighter and tighter, and the sun comes out and shines really brightly, that of his own accord the guy takes his jacket off effortlessly. And I think that for me sums up a lot of the things that we try and do in my college, is that it takes longer, but actually shining brightly and showing the way and how fantastic it is, and it being the kind of party that everybody wants to join. Yes, you will never get 100% of everybody, but I've found that you actually get deeper and more sustainable engagement through that approach, rather than put it on the bottom of the observation form, and if you haven't mentioned sustainability, you can't get a grade 1 in your observation. It just doesn't work. It becomes tokenistic and kind of sometimes drives the wrong behaviours as well. It puts people off and makes people push it to an arm's like distance. So I also think it's important that we celebrate the work, and again, simple little things when we're actually sending out those emails, or even in staff or student awards or whatever. What are we rewarding? What are we saying are the things that are really important to us as an organisation? So we've given quite a lot of thought to how we recognise work in this particular area. And again, sometimes it's not always about, just about being the best and being at the top of the tree and the top of the pile, or that member of staff. Sometimes it's about the journey. It's about introducing something. It's about the small little steps, because sometimes it's those small first steps that are harder. We know that, don't we? So like if we want to exercising again or whatever, it's that first run that actually is much harder than if you're sort of like doing your 12th run for that sort of like fortnight. So I just wanted to put that out there really in terms of just what I've learned through like trial and error in terms of trying to move this agenda forward. For me, it's about shining brightly rather than sort of like the probably more carrot than stick, to use Steve's phrase.
That's a perfect note to draw things to a close on, Simon, and shining the sun on it. Fantastic. Thank you. Really, really great. Colleagues, first of all, big thank you to everybody finding the time to join the call today. It's, you know, as I said right at the opening remarks, you know, people are incredibly busy, so we really appreciate that. We also know that we are talking to a lot of the converted. We understand that, but your opinions and your comments today continually inform what we're doing, and we will from today summarise the recording. We'll go through that, we'll pick out the themes, and obviously the chat is all recorded as well, which is really helpful to us. So, you know, although we might be mostly converted, it gives us the way forward on this. So thank you. I hope that Amy and Manveer and Ebony really feel that that's been valuable to you as well. And thank you so much for taking the time to frame the questions, to put the challenge out. And I hope you all really feel that any accusations that we don't want to listen to students or we're not about students can be kicked into the long grass, because I think this session has proven that everybody on the call really does put students at the centre. I hope you can all agree with that. Our thanks to Steve and to Simon and to Jim and to James. Thank you so much, everybody. And sorry to keep putting you on the spot there. As you know, sharing these things when you're multitasking, looking between the chat and the screens is a bit of a challenge, but I thank you for your patience. I think we got through there. So big thanks. And thanks, Fiona, to EAUC for all your work behind the scenes as a secretariat, making sure we're in the right place and at the right time, and all the prep work, all the papers that you produce. So thank you so much. I'm going to finish and just hand back briefly to Fiona to just wrap up and just tell us what next steps will be. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much, Ian. Yeah, as we said at the beginning, this session has been recorded. The recording will be up on the website in about an hour. It just takes me a little time to download it. Along with that, as Ian says, we will do a summary of the discussion, and then we'll put that out onto the Climate Commission website. And the next session we've got, and this is a really important one for all of you, to engage with governors and chairs. We have a next session coming up on the 2nd of September, particularly focused on chairs and governors of universities and colleges. We're working closely with AOC and the Committee of University Chairs on that session. So please do help us to engage with your governors of your institutions. Big thank you for everyone taking part, and thank you very much. Goodbye.
Thanks. Thank you. Thank you, everybody, and look forward to seeing you all very soon. Take care.
Bye. Take care.